This started about October of last year. It's new for this conference. And if you're writing code in any traditional way, stop, right? It's over. And if you manage a company and you have software programmers say, why are you still writing code the way you did it 6 months ago? This has a lot of implications globally because it means that the productivity of software, which has always been an issue, is going to become far, far greater. It also means that individuals will be able to build incredibly powerful applications and so forth. You saw, for example, this huge sell-off in software as a service stocks, essentially traditional software stocks. That's because the market decided that those products would literally go away, which of course is not true. They're probably oversold. They're directionally in trouble, and they themselves will have to adapt.
That is Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, the man who helped build the modern internet. And he is sitting there telling you that an entire profession, one he dedicated his life to, is over. And guys, he is not talking about some future prediction. He is saying it already happened last October. Here is the full conversation.
So it's important to understand that Ukraine is the laboratory for future war. I'm not in any way endorsing this war. It's a horrible war. I've seen plenty of people die. It's just horrible. Horrible, horrible, horrible. Having said that, it's important to understand what's going on. Today, the flood, as it's known, is quite wide. That's the actual line demarcating the two sides. And the people who are on that area are in foxholes. The minimum number of days they spend in the foxholes is 50. But in many cases, it's up to 3 to 4 months. How do they survive? Drones supply them with water and food. If they stick their head out of the ground, they're killed. That's what a transparent battlefield looks like. And I don't think we Americans understand this. I think almost no country understands that that's what the future of drone war means. The result of this is that the front is largely frozen. It's very hard for either side to go against the other. And people take enormous risks running along the fields, hiding under trees and so forth, while the drone hunters are hunting them. And it's just horrible to watch. In Ukraine, they've recently announced that they've hit their 4th month of killing their quota of Russian targets, which they say is 35,000. To give you an idea of the scale of this war, it's hard for us to understand. Think about the number of people who we lost in Vietnam in the context of what's going on in Ukraine. The Ukraine numbers are not released, but it's substantially lower than 35,000. And the consequence of this thing is anything that moves is destroyed. So get rid of your tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery, flamethrowers, all the fun stuff that you see in movies, right? It's sort of over, replaced by these powerful robotic systems.
And here is the part that sends me cold shivers. He called Ukraine a laboratory for future wars. A laboratory. Real people, real foxholes, real bodies. And the word he chose is laboratory, which means someone somewhere is watching this war very carefully and taking notes. And if Ukraine is the laboratory, then the experiment is not over. You do not shut down a laboratory when it is still producing results. You keep it running, and that thought alone should disturb you deeply because it means there may be very powerful people with very powerful interests who have no real incentive to end this war anytime soon. Every drone that drops, every new tactic that gets tested, every piece of data that comes off that battlefield is feeding a machine that will be used in the next conflict and the one after that. These are not just soldiers dying in those foxholes, they are data points. And that is one of the darkest things I have heard a technologist say in a very long time.
A week ago, China released DeepSeek v4. And when I was working on the National Security Commission for AI, we worked really hard with Trump 1 and Biden to implement hardware controls for chips. We were very successful collectively, all of us, to limit hardware access to China. And I was strongly in favor of this policy, as were many people. It looks like the policy has worked, but it's largely beginning to not work. The Chinese are clever, they're smart, and they have now built systems that are within striking range of the top models in America, but with much, much less powerful hardware. The technical summary is that they use a chip called the Ascend chip. It uses a slower process, and they've invented new software ways to get around the various latency and architectural problems. What I like about this is that we have real competitors. What I don't like about it is China is very focused in broad diffusion of this technology globally, and it's all open source, which means it's largely uncontrolled and not controlled in any way by us. So I think a fair statement is, a year ago I said I thought that they were 1 to 2 years behind. It looks like they've caught up enough that the most recent analysis is China is within 6 months, which is a nanosecond, right, in our world. So it gives you a sense of how committed China is to the AI leadership position. And they're not going to stop. If it makes you feel any better, in order to do this, you have to have a whole country of engineers, scientists, nerds, money, hardware, and so forth. There are not going to be many countries that can do this on their own. But China's clearly one, America's another one with our allies, of course. Maybe there'll be a third or fourth.
So the strategy that took years of bipartisan effort to build, the chip restrictions that Schmidt himself helped design, China has engineered around them on weaker hardware with smarter software. And that 2-year gap that gave everyone some comfort is now 6 months. 6 months, and Schmidt is the architect of that containment strategy, sitting there admitting it is crumbling. But what really concerns me is what he says next, that China is flooding the world with open source AI, which means the competition is not just between two governments anymore, it is between two visions of what AI should be and who it should serve.
But the Chinese models are open source, open weights. So for example, this means that if you want to take DeepSeek v4 and you want to add powerful capabilities and you're evil, which none of you are, and I'm not suggesting the Chinese would do this, but somebody could do this, some evil person exists in the world, how would we know that? How would we police it? How would we see it? At least with the American models, the big ones are under corporate control, proprietary, we know who to call, the military can call, the police can call, and so forth. But if you release this stuff to open source, it's dangerous enough that a lone actor, a new kind of terrorist could emerge. Obviously, we want to avoid that. And we want to acknowledge it's possible, and we want to get ahead of it, and it requires multi-stakeholder agreement. So the tech industry is full of people who pontificate on this stuff, and they're not trained in economics, they're not trained in social sciences because they didn't have time to take those classes, they were too busy programming. So first place, maybe we should ask people who have actually studied this. In talking to economists who've studied labor economics and so forth, the argument goes something like this. The power of AI in terms of efficiency is so great that companies will adopt it, and the companies themselves become more profitable and bigger. And although there's plenty of internal disruption, so it's painful, the fact of the matter is the company gets bigger and the economy grows overall. That has been true basically for 200 years, and it's been true forever.
And this is where it gets really dark. Schmidt is not talking about some distant future threat. The tools to cause serious damage are already out there, already downloadable. Anyone in the world can take that Chinese open source model, modify it, add whatever they want to it, and nobody would even know. No paper trail, no company to call, no government to hold accountable, and then he pivots to the economy, and I need you to catch what he is actually saying. Yes, the economy will grow, yes, companies will get bigger and more profitable, but who does that actually help? The people who got displaced in the process, the ones who lost their jobs to the same AI that made the company richer. Schmidt basically says the economy has always adjusted and it will adjust again. But 200 years of economic history happened before AI could replace an entire profession overnight. This time feels different.
So the first question is, do you think that that will continue? And I do. And I think that what will happen is we'll have a shortage of people for jobs because the economy will grow so quickly because of the productivity. That's the optimistic view. The accelerationist view is a stronger version of that, which is that things become so inexpensive that we can all sit around on the beach and things like that. I think my own view, and again, this is conjecture, is that's probably unlikely. And the reason is, at least in the American system, we love lawyers fighting lawyers. We love watching sports teams. We're not going to be sitting around drinking Mai Tais and so forth on the beach. We'll just engage in a higher level of competition. And I think that will provide plenty of employment.
And there it is, the classic response you always hear from these guys. Don't worry, the economy will adjust. Don't worry, new jobs will be created. Don't worry, you will just compete at a higher level. But nobody ever tells you what happens to the person in the middle of that adjustment. The one who is 40 years old, been doing the same job for 15 years and just got told that a machine does it better now. What does competing at a higher level mean for that person? And see, this is the pattern. Every time someone raises the job loss question, they pivot to optimism. They talk about how the economy grew through the Industrial Revolution, through the internet, through every major shift, and they are not lying. The economy did grow, but the people who got crushed in those transitions, they did not get to wait around for the economy to adjust, they just lost. And AI is moving so much faster than any of those previous shifts that the gap between disruption and adjustment could swallow entire generations.
So many people blame AI for stuff. When you look at the actual job losses, there are two categories. The first is mine, right? There's no question that if you are a young software person entering the software field, it's harder to get a job for the reasons that I stated. The other one are low-end or low-paid customer service workers. If you think about it, in 10 years, there'll probably be a lot more, right? But it's much slower than people think. I don't spend my time worrying about this question.
I have a question. One of the things that I hear within the field of where the people working on AI is that everybody talks about a human-centered AI. Yet, when we go at the technical level, that falls or is not at all. So, and I believe that one of the reasons is because most of the people that are building AI are engineers, coders, programmers, and so on. And now people are really thinking that we need to bring all the humanistic aspects, so the brain science, cognitive science, psychology, into the AI during the entire cycle of building AI, training, and so on, and creating the algorithms. I have noticed that big companies like Google, DeepMind, now they have jobs for psychologists, cog sciences. This is becoming a reality?
So you're exactly right, and thank you for making this point. So in our books, Dr. Kissinger and I basically said, AI is too important to leave it to people like me, right, who have a technical background. We need the great philosophers, the sort of humanists, if you will. They are beginning to show up. And the reason is the humanists produce graduate students. And this is the most interesting thing for a graduate student in humanities to work on, is the impact on their field in psychology or government or political science or whatever of this powerful set of tools. So I think we're getting in better shape.
And there it is, Schmidt's version of optimism. The economy grows, the top people win big. Everyone else, well, they engage in a higher level of competition for fewer jobs against AI systems that work through the night and do not ask for benefits. He is one of the most powerful technologists alive, and that is the most reassuring thing he could offer. And the thing is, I do not think he is lying. I think he genuinely believes the economy adjusts. But the people who get displaced while that adjustment happens, the ones in the middle, the ones who spent years learning a skill that just became obsolete, Schmidt does not have a plan for them. Nobody does. And that silence is louder than anything else he said. If this opened your eyes, subscribe. See you in the next video.